Are you ready to find out how good the faces of modern hip hop are? Because today, we are going to be ranking every album by the big three from worst to best. Now, when it comes to Kendrick Lamar, Drake, and J. Cole, while these rappers have been viewed as the artists who have defined what hip hop represents today better than anybody else, as Kendrick Lamar recently dissed Drake and J. Cole, and the rap world has been in shambles ever since, this trio has never been compared more to one another than at this very moment, and with people questioning certain members of the trio's greatness because of this very feud, there has never been a better time to rank every album that they have ever released. Now, to keep this ranking as fair as possible, I've only considered solo studio albums, so there will be no mixtapes, compilations, or collab projects, as by just looking at what these rappers have been able to achieve in their very highest form of artistic expression, we can truly settle the debate on who is the greatest of them all and if these three even belong in the same conversation together. So if you are ready to find out if Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, and Drake are really as great as everybody says, or if any of them are actually overrated, let's waste no time and let's get right into it. Now, kicking off this list in last place, we got Drake's 7th studio album, Honestly Nevermind, and while this record isn't really a rap album at all, in a hip-hop landscape where so many rappers have taken ambitious genre-bending risks and have had them pay off, Drake's attempt at trying to make a dance album failed miserably, as he did not put the work in whatsoever to make the leap into this new sound actually worth anybody's time. Now, on Honestly Nevermind, we just witnessed Drake phone in some of the most pathetic performances of his career as in an attempt to make some catchy house tunes. Drake just spit on the established identity of the genre he was trying to integrate his sound into, as in a style of music that is known for its infectious and lively energy. Drake delivered a series of wretched performances that were about as lifeless as possible, and making things even worse, the production on this project feels just about as generic and dull as it can possibly get. From Drake's whiny singing that explores heartbreak in the most generic and annoying ways possible, to the just flat out abysmal creative decisions like sampling a squeaking bed into the entire melody on the track Currents. Almost everything about this album is a sheer and utter joke, and if you think I'm being too harsh, I think what puts into perspective just how terrible this album is in its entirety is that despite 13 out of the 14 songs being house cuts, the only great track on the project is the outro Jimmy Cooks with 21 Savage, which is a full-blown trap song. So overall, while some people praise Honestly Nevermind for being something different in Drake's catalog, just because an artist tries something new doesn't mean that it's automatically good, and with this record being filled with aggressively offensive songs that disrespect an entire musical movement, it's the worst album that has ever been released not just by Drake, but by any member of the big three. Coming in at number 18, we got another Drake record, with this time his 8th studio album, For All the Dogs, and when it comes to this project, while it's nowhere near as miserable as Honestly Nevermind, it still displays Drake at his sheer and utter laziest, as aside from a few great songs here and there, this album showcases to us a version of Drake who is trying to get the absolute most out of the absolute least. Now, with Drake's most recent album, this is really one of the more frustrating records in his entire catalog, because while there are traces of a strong project through tracks like 8 AM in Charlotte and Virginia Beach, in its entirety, For All the Dogs is an album that feels like it was designed to be a product rather than a piece of art more than any other album in Drake's discography has ever been. In a time where music consumption has become so reliant on social media trends, it seems like Drake made this album more to generate memes rather than saying anything of value, as whether it's Drake acting like a complete clown as he does his best Yeet impression on IDGAF, or he's acting as goofy as ever on Rich Baby Daddy. So many songs on For All the Dogs leave you questioning if Drake is even trying to be a legitimate artist anymore, or if he has just fully become a parody of his former self. So all in all, with For All the Dogs, because it's so much more focused in its very nature on harvesting as many streams as possible and trades in so much of its integrity to just make some of the most ridiculous and cringe-inducing music that Drake ever has, it's really hard to get through this album in its entirety, and for this reason, it's near the bottom of this list. Now, coming in at number 17, we got yet another Drake album with Certified Lover Boy, and very similar to For All the Dogs. This record's biggest issue is that it's trying to be a product rather than a piece of genuinely great music, but even with all the blatant stupidity on this LP, you do get a lot more great moments from Drake. On CLB, whether you're getting lost in some top-notch lyrical performances from the OVO rapper like on Champagne Poetry, or you're turning up to some of the hardest hitting bangers he's released in years like Fair Trade with Travis Scott, This is an album that definitely comes with its fair share of highs, but at the same time is just torn down by having such mind-numbing material scattered throughout all of it. With some of the most ridiculous song concepts and head-scratching lyrics, CLB is a record that for every great moment it has, there is just so much sheer and utter stupidity surrounding it that you can never be invested into the record in its entirety, and it's really a shame because if you cut out all the cringe and gimmicky moments from this project, you would actually have one of Drake's best album in years. But as it stands, Certified Lover Boy is just another missed opportunity in Drake's discography that, while it may have sold well, because of how ridiculous it is, it will never be respected within hip-hop and music culture. Now, coming in at number 16, we got the first album that is not a Drake project with J. Cole and his debut album Cole World's Sideline Story. And with this record, while this isn't a bad album by any means, it just lacks most of the qualities that made J. Cole's mixtapes before this so captivating, and also the maturity that made his later projects so beloved. So with Sideline Story, this is a record that, as a J. Cole fan, you can go back and find a ton of great moments that really highlight why Cole became the force that he was regarded as for over a decade. But with so many songs on this project that were seemingly mandated by Cole's label at the time, Rockefeller Records, to be on the project in order so that it could perform well commercially, we see a version of J. Cole here that on so many tracks is compromised creatively, and hearing Cole pretty much being forced into making his most dull and superficial tracks ever, it just feels so off-putting when you know of everything else he did after this record. Now, with that said, this album is still miles better than the projects before it on this list, as even as Cole was battling for creative control, he was able to ingrain some super exciting songs into the very DNA of this project. Cole's passion for his craft was so evident when you hear cuts like Dollar in a Dream 3 and the criminally underrated Rise and Shine, and while songs and moments like these are so inspiring, there is just not enough of them to make this project truly great, and for this reason, I can't put Sideline Story any higher than number 16. Now, coming in at number 15, we once again have another Drake album with his 2018 record Scorpion, and while this album was one of Drake's most successful commercially, with it being his longest at 25 songs, it also makes for one of the bumpiest listens in his entire discography. Now, when we look at Scorpion, with this record being a double album that was designed to showcase how great Drake the rapper is in the first half and how great Drake is as a singer in the second, between the album running for an hour and a half and the fact that there is no synergy between so much of the project, while this LP tried to show us that Drake is the ultimate hip-hop artist of our generation, all it proved is that he is all over the place when it came to making projects at this point in his career. Just like some of Drake's studio albums that follow this, Scorpion gives you constant tonal whiplash, as on one song, you'll go from hearing Drake sounding as inspired and lively as he ever has, and in the next, he will literally give you some of his worst music ever. Now, while this record suffers from the modern Drake album syndrome, it's made it to this point on the list because when Drake does something good on this album, it hits hard, as Scorpion has some of the very best Drake hits and deep cuts in the second half of his career in its entirety. Whether Drake's rapping over a soulful DJ Premier beat and dedicating a track to his mother, or he's flipping Lauryn Hill's X Factor to make one of the catchiest hits of the late 2010s, when this album decides to do something good, it nails it. But as every great moment on this album is faced with a viciously terrible cut like Ratchet Happy Birthday after it, there's only so much enjoyment you can get out of this project. So for Scorpion being the most all-over-the-place record in Drake's entire catalog, despite its strengths, it can only go so high on this list. And coming in at number 14, we got J. Cole's fifth studio album, KOD, and with this record, I think it's the most frustrating release in Cole's entire catalog, as when you look at what J. Cole was trying to accomplish with the message of this project, it was so important to the current state of hip-hop and really culture as a whole at the time, but when you look at Cole's execution, he was not able to explore the concept of addiction in the depth that it really needed, and as a result, the entire LP just feels incomplete. From surface-level generalizations to half-baked ideas like Cole's alter ego Kill Edward, for so much of KOD, Cole is not able to craft compelling stories that moved forward discussions around people's vices and, most importantly, how they can help themselves. And while nobody expected Cole to be a savior of some sort in this regard, for the album to very clearly identify that this was its very purpose in the intro and then do hardly anything with it, it's just not a good look whatsoever. Now, with that said, I don't think this album is entirely bad because as it progresses, it does get exponentially better as tracks like Kevin's Heart and Windowpane show us J. Cole exploring the topics that he promised with the level of depth that they need, but by this point, the record does not have enough time to ever establish its identity or create any strong overarching narrative or message to offer to its listeners. With these songs and the Lil Pump diss 1985, which looking back on it really feels like J. Cole telling the future, KOD is still a decent record, but overall, when we look at this record in its entirety, it really is a big miss in Cole's catalog and in hip-hop as a whole because conceptually, this had the potential to be his best album, but in actuality, it's arguably his weakest. And coming in at number 13, we got yet another Drake record, this time with his 4th studio album, Views, and with this LP, when we look back on it in the entirety of Drake's discography, this is really the project that birthed the modern era of Drake's music, where he began to focus more on chasing hits and sales figures as opposed to making genuinely great music, and with this project being the bridge between the two eras that have made up Drake's career, you really do get a little bit of both worlds here. Now with Views, the one thing that this record has going for it against all of Drake's albums after it is that it has a pretty consistent tone and atmosphere, and while Drake definitely leans way too hard into trying to make this album as commercial as it possibly could be, there's still enough integrity to make the project an engaging listening experience. As Drake is able to rap his head off and sing simultaneously, Views shapes out to be one of his more dynamic records as a whole, and if it wasn't for Drake just muddying up the quality of this project and even certain songs in themselves by just making them way too pop-oriented or radio-friendly, Views may even be a little higher on this list, but as it stands, while it's not a great project, as we have seen the quality of Drake's albums decline viciously since it, looking back on it, it's aging pretty nicely. Now at the number 12 spot, we got J. Cole's 4th studio album, For Your Eyes Only, and with this record, I've had such a complicated relationship with it over the years because one side of it is truly brilliant and offers us some of J. Cole's best storytelling ever, but the other half of this record is honestly, and don't get mad at me, embarrassing for somebody who is regarded as one of the best rappers of our generation to even release. Whether it's the hard singing that makes a track like Fold and Close the absolute worst in Cole's entire catalog, or songs that just drag on in the most directionless and painful way possible. I don't know how J. Cole said that Kendrick Lamar's albums put people to sleep because some of this record will make you go into hibernation, but with that said, for all of this album's problems and for all the complaints I have with some tracks, on the other side of things, For Your Eyes Only has some of J. Cole's best material as well. Whether it's some of the most important songs in his discography like Neighbors or straight out thrilling lyrical cuts like Immortal, there are moments on For Your Eyes Only that show J. Cole as a master of his craft, and when it comes to this, no cut does this better than the self-titled track, which with almost 9 minutes of storytelling, makes for perhaps the greatest contribution J. Cole has ever made to the hip-hop world, as he's able to deliver an extensive and complex performance that has you on the edge of your seat till the final word. So all in all, while For Your Eyes Only is a very flawed album that has so much wrong with it, beyond its super low lows, for having some of the highest highs in Cole's entire catalog, it's made it all the way to number 12 on this list. Now right outside the top 10, at number 11 we got what has become the most overlooked Drake album in his catalog with his debut LP, Thank Me Later, and while this record does not have the defining qualities that made his albums following this so revered, it still shows us one of the hungriest versions of Drake that we have ever seen, as he's doing everything in his power here to prove that he is here to stay in the rap game, and the record succeeds because of this. Now with Thank Me Later, although so many Drake albums now overshadow this project, whether it's because of their icon status or due to how gimmicky they are, don't sleep on this record because when you look at all of Drake's 8 studio albums, this is shockingly one of his best, as between its concise tracklist which has little filler to the exciting moments that gave us a glimpse of how dynamic, versatile, and unmatched Drake can be when he's actually trying to make great music, there's really no other project he's ever made that's quite like this. After seeing just how careless Drake has gotten with his projects in recent years, it's honestly so refreshing to go back to this record and hear a version of the OVO rapper who, while he doesn't have the same grasp over his craft that he would display just a year later on Take Care, still manages to offer everything that Drake's recent albums are missing. So in its entirety, for being a passionate album that matches its ambition with quality tracks that have really become underrated as Drake has just gotten bigger and bigger with time, Thank Me Later's made it all the way up to number 11 on this list. And cracking the top 10, we got a record that I had a hard time placing on this list with J. Cole's 6th studio album, The Offseason, and now originally, I had this album a little higher up as the insane way J. Cole raps on this album doesn't just make for one of the most entertaining performances of his career, but it's truly a display of lyrical skill that would prove his place in a big three more than anything else, as Cole just raps on this project like he is going to destroy any artist in his way, but with Cole recently showing that the cutthroat performances like the ones he dropped on this very record were all worth next to nothing, as when push came to shove, despite all the talk, he forfeited in a beef against Kendrick Lamar. It really dampers the entire listening experience to a degree, because you know that the Cole on this album was merely a facade and that he truly is not as lethal of an MC as he claims he is throughout this entire record. Now don't get me wrong, rappers lying in their lyrics is really nothing new for the genre, but when you are rapping about hip-hop at its most fundamental level, and using an entire project to assert the idea that you are the very best MC on the planet, this is an instance where you really can't get away with talking just to talk. And with that said, while Cole making one of the lamest moves in hip-hop history definitely weakens the mystique around this album that makes it so thrilling, aside from this, The Offseason is still a pretty good record that showcases just how entertaining lyrical rap can be, as after a series of records where J. Cole was a little over his head when it came to trying to make these insane concept albums, it was so refreshing to hear him just come track to track with the absolute best bars that he could possibly draw up. Now, even with how captivating Cole's performances are, listening to this record and just knowing the actual way that J. Cole has lived up to its lyrics since he was seriously tested, it makes the entire album feel hollow. So despite everything that The Offseason gets right and how high of a level it showcases J. Cole rapping at technically, the fact that the entire sentiment that defines the sheer existence of this album is fake, it really hurts the record, and for this reason, I can't put it any higher than number 10 on this list. Now, cracking the top 10, we got J. Cole's sophomore studio album, Born Sinner, and where Sideline Story was a record that felt compromised and uncharacteristic for J. Cole, Born Sinner felt like Cole's true debut to the world, as here, the Dream the Leader established everything that he would become beloved for years to come. With Born Sinner, from the grand production that incorporates elements both from hip-hop's past and present at the time to Cole's lyrical arsenal, which was both more poignant and relatable here than before. This was a project that thrived by staying so true to everything that defined hip-hop's lineage, but also for presenting it to listeners in a way that they have never exactly seen before. Born Sinner really established Cole as not just a centerpiece in what mass audiences considered the big three, but also as a premier lyricist and storyteller in the genre at the time, and with so many cuts on this project that told tales in a way that bent listeners' expectations and showed everybody the unique perspectives that J. Cole brought into the hip-hop world. Overall, it really cemented him as an MC who was really in a lane of his own and who connected with listeners in a way that nobody else did. So for Born Sinner really bringing to life and capturing everything that has defined the best aspects of J. Cole's artistry almost better than every other album he ever released has, it's one of his best projects ever, and it's all the way at number 9 on this list. Now moving on to number 8, the albums we are looking at from here on out are all great, and in this spot, Kendrick Lamar has finally joined this race with his debut album Section 80, and with Kendrick coming out of the gate with a record that was so complete and well thought out, he immediately showed the world that he was destined to be an all-time great, as his first album reached heights that most rappers can never touch throughout their entire careers. Now, when it comes to Section 80, this album really outlined everything that would allow for Kendrick Lamar to become the absolute force in the rap world that we have known him as for over a decade at this point. With a skilled lyrical arsenal that was able to craft both the most compelling and heartfelt of stories, but also the most enthralling bangers at the same time. Through his well-rounded repertoire, Kendrick showed everyone from the get-go that he had the potential to truly end up as one of the greatest rappers of all time on this project, through performances that didn't just breathe new life into West Coast hip-hop, but the entire genre as a whole at the time. Looking at this record in the context of all the albums that Kendrick released following it, Section 80 really feels like the prelude to the storm he would take everyone on after, as each song on this LP serves as a touch point that shows us a different aspect of both Kendrick's skill, but also his morality, and through the projects that followed this, Lamar would only build on the foundation that he laid out so strongly here. So overall, with Section 80 being a phenomenal experience that welcomes us into the world of a generational artist who right out of the gate had the potential to be the king of an entire era, it's number 8 on this list. And coming in at number 7, we got Drake's sophomore album Take Care, and with this LP, out of every body of work that Drake has given us over the years, both good and bad, This is really the ultimate project of his, as it's able to not just capture his dynamic skill set on full throttle, but it's able to do this on a level that is near perfection for Drake standards. On Take Care, Drake creates an experience that embodies everything that a blockbuster rap album needs, as between its legendary hits, top-tier deep cuts, and all-time great performances from both Drake, but also the long list of features that range from Kendrick Lamar and The Weeknd to Andre 3000 all the way to Stevie Wonder. This is a body of work that showcased Drake pushing himself to not just make an album that has a ton of mainstream appeal, but more importantly, an experience that will be able to last the test of time, and that it definitely has so far. With all the moving pieces Take Care has, it's easy for a massive blockbuster album like it to feel extremely dated all these years later, but because Drake really focused in on what makes his distinct sound and style so special, this record is timeless, as in a catalog for Drake that as the years have went on, became more focused on chasing the trends and just doing anything to appeal to as many people as possible. This record has so much character and charm, as every single decision on it serves to benefit the gloomy and lavish feel of the project. There are not many albums from the 2010s decade that are able to pack as much into it as Take Care, as hearing Drake able to absolutely scorch tracks lyrically and then just a few songs later sing about some of his worst heartbreaks is really a musical superpower, and for all these reasons, Take Care is a phenomenal album that has made it all the way to number 7 on this list. And right outside the top 5, we got J. Cole's third studio album, 2014 Forest Hills Drive, and with this record, while many people are coming at Cole's legacy as he forfeited to Kendrick Lamar, regardless of that move, this is an album that isn't just undeniably great, but it's without a doubt Cole's magnum opus. Throughout Forest Hills Drive, J. Cole delivers the performance of his lifetime as he takes the relatability that made a project like Born Sinner so compelling in the first place and takes it to the next level as he gets more personal than he ever has before. From rapping about his adolescent fears to exploring how fame has affected his life, Forest Hills Drive is truly the defining body of work in Cole's catalog as it encompasses his entire life story. There are so many powerful moments on this record that are conveyed through Cole's openness with the listener and also just the relatability of many of the positions he raps about himself being in, and ultimately, by hearing about some of the struggles Cole faced coming up and then hearing about where he's at now. The transparency and honesty that Cole brings to this album also makes it one of the most inspiring listens you can find in all the genre. So for being a powerful project that shows us J. Cole operating at the highest we will probably ever see him at, Forest Hills Drive has made it all the way to number 6 on this list. And cracking the top 5, we got Drake's third studio album, Nothing Was the Same, and just like J. Cole with Forest Hills Drive, what makes this record from Drake so special is that it explores his life and where it was going at the time in a way that we had never seen before, and ultimately, because of the sheer passion and prowess Drake harnessed at this point in his career and put right into this LP, he gave us a body of work that will always represent just how amazing he can be when he is truly invested in his craft. When we look at Nothing Was the Same, this is a record that's so grandiose in its soundscape that everything on it feels so meaningful and important, and with Drake having the absolute best lyrical performance of his career on this record as well. His storytelling makes every track feel like we're not just getting the ultimate account of who Drake is, but who Aubrey Graham is deep down inside as well. Whether this is through braggadocious flexes or by Drake looking back on where his life used to be, he navigates both the past and present of his life in a way that definitely does get cocky at times, that's for sure, but still comes off in such a genuine way, because while you hear about how much money and respect Drake has now, he's never afraid to tell you how difficult his life used to be and still is. Because of the way Drake navigates the highs and lows of his very existence, this allows the album to flesh out its concept in any way that it desires, which gives Nothing Was the Same some of the most memorable bangers in Drake's catalog, but also some of the most somber cuts as well. All in all, with Nothing Was the Same, as we look back on this album over a decade after its release and see how Drake's solo albums have spiraled downhill from this very moment, no matter what happens to Drake, a project like this really preserves his greatness and overall the gimmicks, serves to show us why Drake will be remembered in the history books of hip-hop. Now moving on to the top 4 on this list, Drake's 8 studio albums have all been ranked, and so have Cole's 6, so that leaves us with 4 albums from Kendrick Lamar left on the table, and in this spot, we got Kendrick's 2017 album, Damn, and with this being the record that Kendrick Lamar seemingly designed to be the most commercial from him, it really shows him playing in somebody like Drake's lane and just beating him out, as Damn doesn't just have some of the most exciting bangers of the late 2010s, but beyond all the noise it made with its massive hit songs, it still manages to be one of the most complex and well thought out concept albums that hip hop has seen in quite some time. Now with Damn, Looking back on this record, this is a project that really showcased Kendrick Lamar flexing his muscles in a way that few other artists have ever been able to. After releasing two of the most acclaimed albums in hip-hop history, which we will definitely get to later, Kendrick just went berserk here, as he didn't just show that he can make hit songs better than anybody else can, but in addition to making some of the biggest songs of its respective year, Kendrick wove these hits through one of the most thought-provoking concept albums of the entire 2010s decade, and you'll be left questioning everything when you're done listening to this. From the tracks that all focus on a cohesive emotion, event, or trait, to the sequencing of the record, which actually tells its story in reverse chronological order. Kendrick took so many creative risks on Damn that make it such a rich and layered body of work that you can always discover something new from each time you listen to it. Now, I could sit here and say more about Damn, but I think when you look at this album in its entirety, as this is easily Kendrick's most mysterious album conceptually, and because it was intentionally made like this to challenge the listener at every given moment, I think it's just best to leave it here. And cracking the top 3. We got Kendrick Lamar's most recent album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, and with J. Cole calling this record tragic on his Kendrick diss. It's honestly hilarious that he said this because in my eyes, it's miles better than any of Cole's records because while Mr. Morale is not the commercial hit that Damn was, it was never supposed to be, and I think people miss this point. There's a narrative between certain hip-hop fans brewing that says that this album was complete and utter garbage, and between the presentation and the actual music on the album to the story that it's telling. While all music is definitely subjective, to call a record that's this complex garbage is just blasphemous as beyond any of Mr. Morale's musical brilliance. What this project represents in hip-hop has already made it one of the most important rap albums to release in this decade. Now with Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, Kendrick Lamar took the greatest risk that he has ever taken in his career, and that was to deconstruct his own self in an attempt to heal himself from all the issues that he had been running from his whole life. Where Kendrick once made music with the goal of saving the world, he realized here that he can't save anything if he can't even help himself, and through one of the most insane track lists that you will ever encounter, Kendrick gives you his entire heart as he tries to heal himself and find inner peace, and with songs that beyond their narrative complexity push all the conventions of what hip-hop can even sound like. There's few albums that have ever been released in hip-hop's 50-year history that will leave your jaw dropped to the floor more times than this. So with Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, I think as time goes on and people realize how important what Kendrick did on this album is, only more listeners are going to realize that this isn't just a great album, but it's one of Kendrick's best and one of the best that any of the premier names in rap have had to offer. And coming in at number 2, we got Kendrick Lamar's sophomore studio album, Good Kid, Mad City, and with this record, do I even have to talk about it? I think every single hip-hop listener realizes that the genius concept album that Kendrick made about navigating his life growing up in Compton is one of the best rap albums of all time, as no matter what type of listener you are, this record doesn't just honor and appeal to every single aspect that is ingrained in hip-hop culture, but it masters them. I don't think I have to say anything else about this masterpiece, but when it comes to masterpieces, what's insane about Kendrick Lamar as a whole is that he has 2 of them, with Good Kid, Mad City being his first one, and then his 3rd studio album, To Pimp a Butterfly, being not just his other, but his magnum opus and the best album out of all of the 19 solo albums released by the Big 3. Now this is another album that I have praised in multiple videos, so instead of telling you how this is the holy grail of hip-hop again, what I will say to prove its greatness is that after J. Cole called this album mid, he knew the take was so horrendous that he couldn't sleep for multiple nights, and because of this, he literally humiliated himself by apologizing to the man who dissed him. But if I said To Pimp a Butterfly was mid, I think I'd do the exact same thing. To Pimp a Butterfly is an album that actualizes everything that hip-hop as a tool of expression can be, and if you don't want to take my word for it, just look at somebody as musically gifted as Kanye's reaction to the project. From the genius storytelling where nearly everything has multiple meanings, to the visceral emotionality Kendrick shows throughout the LP, to the jazz-infused soundscape that was made by some of the best musicians on the planet, to the poem that drives the album forward and concludes as Kendrick has a conversation with Tupac. Everything about To Pimp a Butterfly is not just amazing, but it really set a new bar for what musical perfection looks like, and for this reason, it's the best rap album released by all the Big 3, so there you have it. There is every Kendrick, J. Cole, and Drake album ranked, and after seeing this head-to-head ranking, I think it's pretty clear that while these 3 have been seen as the most iconic rappers of our generation, There's clearly a massive gap between everybody else and Kendrick Lamar, as he is just leaps and bounds ahead of Drake and Cole, as he has crafted every single one of his albums to offer listeners something that isn't just one of a kind, but that accomplishes everything it sets out to do on a level of near mastery. So now that you've heard my take on all this, let me know. How would you rank Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, and Drake, and do you agree with my ranking as a whole, and what do you think are the top 3 albums between them? I can't wait to see what you have to say in the comments below, and if you want to see who I think has the best and worst rap label out of the big 3, check out the suggested video.